Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the July edition of Molten Music Monthly. So this month I've been camping and frazzled, I've interacted with jellyfish and I seem to have broken the end of my finger. But hey, it's the summer, and during the summer traditionally things get a little bit more quiet around the realms of music technology and synthesis and stuff, but I don't know that that's actually been true so far, because I have a whole ton of stuff to be working on and to be doing that seems to be releasing all the time, consistently and continuously. And so I've got a whole bunch of stuff to tell you about this month. Let's just get into it. So first up is the Moog Labyrinth. Now this is a little bit of a departure for Moog, because it has all this West Coast stuff, because Moog is East Coast. It's over on the East Coast of America, and so therefore does East Coast synthesis, whereas other people like Buchla over on the West Coast, they do West Coast synthesis. What does it matter? Who cares? Nobody really knows or what that really means anymore, but we've come to accept the idea that East Coast means subtractive synthesis, oscillator filter VCA, whereas West Coast tends to mean bubbly bingly bangly, drug infused, lots of fun, surfing on the beach, having a really cool way out time with strange waveforms and low pass gates. You know, which one would you rather be in? Anyway, Sound on Sound sent me the Moog Labyrinth to review in about 4 days before they went to print, so I got my head stuck straight in it, trying to work it out. And it was a strange beast, a strange but interesting and increasingly fascinating little beast. What's interesting about it? Well, it had two oscillators, so it's kind of a complex oscillator arrangement, perhaps, where one is modulating the other. So you're already going to get massively into frequency modulation and those sorts of crazy metallic tones. But then it had this split personality where some of it went through a wave folder where you could turn waves inside out, which is very West Coasty, and the other half went through a filter, but not your warm, gooey Moog filter, ladder filter. No, this was some kind of crazy filter that was very angry about something. So you had this split, these pathways, this labyrinthal nature. You know, although a labyrinth obviously is one pathway, we all know that, right? This kind of gave you multiple pathways in a labyrinth-esque, more of a mazy kind of way. Anyway, let's not get distracted into ancient Greece and keep in with our what's going on. So we got this wave foldering, this filtering, and this is then can be mixed back together. But the interesting thing about that is that you were always hearing the output of either blended together through this blending knob at the end of the signal. So rather than just getting a mix, you could actually get each of them separately or individually or together or blended. And then you could rearrange the order of them, so it could get folded before it get filtered or filtered before it get folded, and then, as I say, take the output out of that before you actually got to the second thing in the series of being what it was doing, or then put it in parallel. And so, as you can imagine, you can very easily get lost in having no idea where it is that you're trying to get to. So it's not the normal friendly, familiar Moog territory that we kind of get used to, and that made it very interesting. The whole thing was then run by these two sequencers at the bottom. They called them funny names and strange things, but ultimately it's just two 8-step sequencers. You could link them together, make one 16-step sequencer. But the way you programmed it is that you could turn steps on and off and then introduce a note that was defined by some kind of randomization algorithm. And you would push the sequencers into generating either random gates and random pitches, or kind of one or the other. But the dual nature of it meant you had two things going on at once that didn't have to be linked. They could be completely different timed. And then you had this strange envelope trigger mix, because it had very simple envelopes, just a decay knob. There's no attack, there's no smoothing into anything. It was bang, which is very much of a low pass gate vibe, but done in a subtractive envelope VCA kind of way. Are you still with me? Anyway, you could mix between these two envelopes, or how they were affecting stuff. So essentially you've got these two trigger patterns, these two enveloped trigger patterns going on, which shaped the way the sound worked and the way the filter changed and the way the wavefolder folded. And you could inject both of these rhythms either individually or mixed together to create chaos within your system. So ultimately, it's a fun, interesting, explorative, adventure of synthesis, and it's not the sort of thing you're going to be able to pick up and go, oh yeah, I know how to use this, because you'll get lost. It's also not the thing that you can find the same sound twice, because you go, oh yes, oh look, I've dialed in a nice sound, and you change it a little bit, oh, I want to go back to where I was. No, there's no going back. You just have to keep on pushing, keep on folding, keep on modulating. Everything seems to do a massive amount and then doesn't do anything at all. And yeah, so I enjoyed it. I immersed myself in it for a few days, and that was a lot of fun. I've done a sound demo that's in the channel if you want to check out what I came up with by the end of it, by plugging it into a Mother 32 and a DFAM just to see what would happen. And generally had a really good time. I think it's the most interesting thing that Moog have done for ages. I mean, I know there's a Spectravox. I just could not be less interested in anything vocodery or filter banky. No, not for me. The Subharmonicon, yeah, kind of interesting, but a little bit almost strangely too weird, too out there to really work out. DFAM, bit straight-laced for me, to be honest. A little bit, eight things going over and over and over, round and round in circles. Whereas if you connect the Labyrinth to it, the DFAM suddenly takes on a whole new personality. So I can recommend doing that. And then the Mother 32 is a straightforward, absolutely top drawer, fantastic sounding, warm and familiar, comfort blanket of a subtractive synthesizer. So this Labyrinth really takes them out of their comfort zone, takes them away from their safe spaces, and gives us something fascinating to play with. Now, Universal Audio came up with this DAW called Luna a few years ago. It was on Mac, so I wasn't really that interested, and it seemed to be tied to Universal Audio DSP platforms. And I'd been burnt by DSP platforms. I'd had a Power Core, TC Power Core, for a long time that really worked really well until it didn't, and then it got completely discontinued and I lost all my plugins. Very, very frustrating. So I kind of decided not to go down that road ever again. However, UAD have been doing their DSP platform for a long time, and it's worked very well, and it has some fantastic sounding plugins, particularly in the way they do analog emulation and vintage sounding stuff. So when they produced a DAW, I thought, well, that's interesting, but not for me. However, recently, and I don't know if it's this month, it might have been a little while ago, but I just haven't been keeping up, they released a Windows version. And not only that, it became free and it became untethered to UAD hardware. So it's essentially a complete DAW for free on both Mac and Windows that you can go and get right now and go and download it and use it. And it's phenomenal. Well, I say phenomenal. I haven't got particularly deep with it yet. However, the interface and what it appears to offer is just extraordinary. It looks absolutely stunning. It has such a fresh, clean and just visually pleasing front end that throws up all this vintage stuff, all these channel strips, all these emulations of tape-based stuff and console-based stuff, and you're just looking at it going, wow. It's kind of what Pro Tools should look like. It's what Pro Tools should look like if they cared about what it looks like. Because Pro Tools is like, oh, we just don't care. Just put all the data on the screen so those engineers can really get down to the minutiae of what they're doing. And that's fine. That works. That works for people. I always see Pro Tools as kind of like the spreadsheet of DAWs. It's for the real heads out there. Whereas many of us are more visually inspired and like interesting environments and a pleasant place to work. I think if you're using Pro Tools, your whole space is a pleasant place to work. You're living already in a spaceship, and so whether the DAW looks good or not is neither here nor there. But for the rest of us who live in a crappy shed somewhere with the builders outside making a whole load of noise, then having the software look nice, transforms and transports you somewhere else. And that's what Luna does. I downloaded it literally the other day, had a bit of a play, and thought, this is amazing. It's just superb. Now, having said that, the MIDI side is a little bit on the basic side, a bit like Pro Tools really, in that you have it supports virtual instruments, it's all VST compatible as well, which for a free DAW is pretty awesome. And you can run virtual instruments, you can do MIDI editing directly on the track, that kind of thing, but there's not a whole lot more than that. It doesn't have clever, pattern generation or anything particularly beyond the basics of your on-track piano roll. It does have a quite interesting ARP plugin built in, which is nice, but it also has a massive virtual instrument called can't remember, shape, I think it is, which gives you 4 layers of sample rompler bass sounds, drawing on a huge library of stuff, and which works plenty well, sounds great, and gives you something to get you going with. But as a completely free recording environment, it's fantastic. And all this vintage emulation that's built in, it's supposedly, I imagine, sounds pretty great too. So you've got all your summing, your mixing, your mastering, your channel strips, EQ, compression, dynamics, all of that is brilliantly emulated with the Universal Audio technology that they do. It's top notch, really great. And then of course they'll want to sell you a whole bunch of plugins to add into that, which is fair enough, but you don't have to do that. You could use free plugins with it. So it absolutely is, hands down, probably the best free DAW out there, I would say. With Traction Waveform free, perhaps those two sitting side by side, but it makes things like Studio One Prime look pretty pathetic in comparison. Any of these other really, really cut down free DAWs, you're just not cutting it anymore. This is great. So go and check that out. I'd recommend it if you're just considering a different direction. You want to do serious audio editing. I mean, it really lends itself to recording bands and mixing and arranging, that kind of thing, a traditional studio feel. Then go and check out Luna from Universal Audio. Talking about DAWs, there's been a bit of an update over at FL Studio. Fruity Loops, our old friend Fruity Loops. They've now decided to drop the ridiculous numbering convention of calling it FL Studio 20.1.6.9, and they're just going to go with the year. Now there's pros and cons of doing that, because it sort of dates you automatically if you're not continuously updating, but FL Studio are famous for continuing to evolve and giving you a lifetime of updates. So it's now called FL Studio 2024. Fantastic. And what does it bring with it? Well, I mean, FL Studio is immense now. I mean, it has hundreds of plugins, hundreds of instruments built in. It does all the mixing, it does all the processing, vocal comping, it does looping, clip launching, step sequencing, modulation, engine, all within itself. It's quite an extraordinary place. It does work differently to other DAWs, and so you can sort of go through a bit of a culture shock, I think, when using it. But if you give it the time, and if you get into it, I think it's an extraordinary place. The big sort of new thing that came in with the last version, and then more with this version, is this idea of FL Cloud. The concept is, rather than having lots of different subscriptions with lots of different companies that give you loops, samples and plugins, that's the new thing, FL Cloud gives you a single subscription, which then brings in all these other manufacturers into that system. So FL Cloud supports a whole bunch of different samples from different companies and different places, but also supports now plugins from people like Baby Audio, Native Instruments, and a whole load of stuff that I can't remember. And so through that subscription you can install them directly from the FL Cloud account into FL Studio, giving you a one-stop shop, if you like, for all your plugins and bits. I mean, if they keep that going, if they keep that up, and if everybody gets on board with it, I think that's a pretty shrewd way of doing it. And that it's a sort of idea that would be really great if everyone did it. So rather than just providing their own plugins, like Presonus do with their Sphere idea, rather than just providing their own, if they provided everybody else's as well, then you could just install plugins directly within your DAW rather than having to faff around with everybody else's bits and pieces. So there you go. Interesting. Nice idea. And keep at it, FL Studio. You are awesome. Simon the Magpie has named a synthesizer after me. That was unexpected. It's called the Round Robin. Looks immense, mad. Well, it's going to be mad, isn't it? It's from Simon the Magpie. But also looks like a heck of a lot of fun. So what is it? Well, it's a box. It's got 4 knobs, 4 voices, 4 waveforms that you scan through. You got like this continuous waveform. A fascinating idea. And you sort of shift this window about, and it grabs 4 waveforms and it throws those onto your 4 voices that you can then sort of tune and tweak individually. So each voice is its own little synthesizer, and then as you play it polyphonically, it will go round the voices in a round robin style, hence the name Round Robin. Apparently it's nothing to do with me. Thanks, Simon. So what else has it got? It has all sorts of modes, like an organ mode with harmonics going on. It's got an arpeggiator mode, all sorts of crazy rhythms and bits and pieces going on. You can automate things within it, like the shifting of the waveforms in order to create different stuff. You can record knob movements. It's got a filter built in. It's got a nice touch strip and sort of a buttony keyboard to get your groove in. It has this great little circular screen which seems to be distorting something. It's like a magnifier that's probably bringing out information from another screen behind it or something. Anyway, it looked fantastic, but it's great, fabulous colours, a whole range of colours to do it in, knobs and stuff to play with, all sorts of sounds and weirdness coming out, and it's by Simon the Magpie. Meanwhile, back at Sonicware, they've come up with another idea for their groove box. They do these groove boxes. It's the same piece of hardware every single time, but they managed to come up with these bizarrely diverse concepts and ideas on how to use them for things. The latest one is called Ambient 0, and this is a box of ambience-ness, isn't it? So you've got 4 channels of stuff, 4 layers of stuff. You've got a drone, pads, noise, and something else. Oh, atmospherics, that's right. And you use these 4 layers to squidge them together into some kind of environmental soundscapes that then evolve and change and move. You can sequence and groove it, of course, all individually, because that's its main thing, is the step sequencer along the top, along with the still those horrible clacky buttons that you use as keys. However, the output of it just seems quite extraordinary, and it's really nice to have like the Groovebox environment that's just taking a break and giving you some place to pause and be mindful and just to evolve stuff, to loop stuff, sequence stuff, modulate stuff, find another thing. It has this really interesting blended modulation system which allows different things to interrupt other things and fluctuate and move to create textures and tones and rhythmic changes and polyrhythmic monotonings and stuff. I mean, to my ears it lacked some warmth somehow. It felt a bit sort of glassy and tinny to some degree, which is slightly disappointing. I find in an ambient droney situation, you just want treacle, you want warmth, you want goo just dripping off every sort of sound and waveform. It wasn't really quite like that. But with the Sonicware stuff, it is generally kind of rough and ready, digitally generated, ready to go, very creative, very modulatable and movable and fun and instant, but on the whole perhaps just lacking a little bit of warmth. There's no end to Cherry Audio's attempts at emulating the world of instruments and giving it to us for a couple of quid. The latest thing is the Wurlybird. It's the Wurlybird 140B. In fact, now this is based on the Wurlitzer. To me, a Wurlitzer is, well, first of all, I think of a fairground ride, but that's a waltzer, obviously, so I've got that completely wrong. But other than that, I always think of Thursford. Now, Thursford is this steam museum in Norfolk, not too far from me, that does this extraordinary Christmas show, I have to say, but that's an aside. But it's a place that has steam engines and merry-go-rounds and stuff, and one of their star attractions is this massive Wurlitzer organ that sort of screws out of the ground as a guy's playing it. Lots of different things, plays with his feet, everything gets played in there. It's fantastic. So that's what Wurlitzer conjures up in my head. But this is all about the Wurlitzer electric piano, which is, it's felt hammers knocking on reeds. As opposed to in a rose, you have hammers knocking on tines, which gives it a more of a sort of a tinkly sine wave, gentle vibe. Whereas the Wurlitzer was kind of rougher, readier, more sawtoothy. I think has a more of an angry sound to it. And this is a sample-based instrument. Samples taken exhaustively from this instrument, and then laid out with a beautiful GUI, because it looked like a baby grand. This electric piano, it wasn't very movable. It's immensely heavy, apparently. But what they've done is they've put the sound there, so you've got the sound, that's great. A couple of controls, it didn't have very much, just like a strange optical vibrato and a few bits and pieces. But then they've put this array of pedals on. And what's interesting about it is that all the pedals work brilliantly. What I mean is, you sit there and you're playing this thing, go, oh yeah, no, that sounds nice, turn on that pedal, oh yeah, that sounds better, turn on that pedal, oh well, that sounds even better, that one, oh my goodness, that one, oh I'm starting to lose all coherence now, but this is awesome, then that one, you know, and it builds into the character of the sound just so brilliantly that it makes you think that they know what they're doing, these Cherry Audio people, and they're actually picking the right things for the sound, because every time it just sounded phenomenal. I mean, I love a Rose piano. Absolutely love the Rose piano. And the Wurlitzer, to my ears, has always kind of been playing second fiddle to that glorious, fantastic kind of fairyland that the Rose can take you to. Whereas the Wurlitzer just felt a bit too gritty for me. But the experience of playing this has been fantastic. I've absolutely loved it, particularly with the effects, particularly adding the delay and the reverb, gives it all that spacey feel, but then it has this edge and this anger to it, which sure, you can overdrive a Rhodes, we do that, but there's something edgy about the Wurlitzer which takes it into a slightly angrier direction. Talking of angrier, Gforce software, or Gforce Instruments, whatever the heck they're called, have released the OB-1. This is another in their range of Oberheim synthesizers, and yeah, this is upset about something. Don't know quite what it is, but it's having a bit of a go. I think this is fantastic. The OB-1, 2 oscillators, sub oscillators, lots of cross modulation, and a filter that, you know, I mean, normally when you're trying to get a filter to self-oscillate or to scream a bit, you have to pump that resonance all the way around. With this, you hardly got the resonance off the ground and it's already falling apart and trying to scream and pull your eyes out. It's an awesome thing. Absolutely brilliant. So, you know, you've got a filter that's chewing its way through all these oscillators. You've got fabulously gooey detuning and just stuff going on. I mean, it's a regular affair. You've got VCAs and envelopes and LFOs, all the sorts of usual stuff you'd expect to have. I mean, the LFO system at the top is quite interesting in that it's got this sort of uber LFO that can be all sorts of shapes and be sent to all sorts of different interesting places. So you've got a lot of modulation possibility, even beyond the core flipping heck, this bass line is gnarly. So you've got that, but it's also up to 16 voice polyphonic, so you can use it as a proper synthesizer as opposed to the original hardware, which was a monophonic synth. And the other nice thing about it is it's got these 4 macros at the side. The macros, I mean, going through the presets, which are superb, the macros are always doing interesting things. They're always tied to 4 or 5 different parameters, and you just turn those and stuff just happens. It moves and it varies and it just creates this extraordinary sound. I mean, my beefs, as I might have mentioned before, if you saw me on Sonic State talking about this, is that the macro knobs don't demonstrate what they're controlling. So you turn the macro, something big is happening, but you can't see what that is, which is a shame. Now, I understand the idea that trying to move all the knobs visually is hard work for the computer to cope with because it's having to swap bitmaps and bits and pieces, but I would have thought there's another way of indicating that with halos or something which shows what's being modulated, because when you modulate with the LFO, that is shown visually on the knobs with this sort of ring of red that goes around them and things like that. So that's a thought on macros. Otherwise, if you need it even worse than it currently is, you can dial in a vintage knob to give it lots of variation and the ability to fall over itself. It has a great arpeggiator and an analog sequencer inside, which is a lot of fun to play with. You know, it's a fun, exciting synthesizer. It's not desperately unusual or strange or innovative. It just sounds awesome and is a hell of a lot of fun to play. Korg has updated their collection to version 5. Korg's collection of synths has been around for decades. I remember using a cracked version 20 years ago, probably. I used it at a gig 14 years ago. Ran it on a little notepad, I don't know. One of those little tiny things. I had to overclock the processor in this little laptop in order to get it to run glitch free. But I was running an M1 and other bits and pieces on it, I think. The Poly 6th probably. Anyway, for my 40th birthday I put together this gig where we played a lot of 80s music. You know, fantastic it was. And it was like the first version of Beck and the Beards, which is the band that I play with from time to time, doing Village Fates and bits and pieces. Anyway, there was a lot of synth in there, and a lot of it was run by the Korg Collection back in the day. It then kind of went to sleep for a decade, and then it came back to life again relatively recently with things like the Triton and other things I can't remember now. Anyway, it's got a new version, and they're introducing some other things from their other sort of associated legacy. So the ARP 2600 is coming in, and also the Vox Continental electric piano and the EP1 electric piano. But if you look through what it has, the MS-20, the Poly 6, Mono Poly, the M1, the Triton, the Prophecy is all in there, the Electribe, all sorts of ancient history Korg stuff, which really goes to show how diverse their journey has been, from original analog synthesis through to digital stuff, through to groove boxes and drum machines, and back and through massive workstations back into more interesting individual synthesizers and sounds and stuff. I think you get such a broad idea within here that it makes it very different to a lot of other collections. I mean, I'm sure collections cover all sorts of stuff, but this largely gets to be analog and vintage is where collections tend to be, whereas this just has this Korg flavour which you don't get anywhere else. So yeah, well worth checking out. It's always been a little bit too expensive, I think. But hey, it's a great collection. Behringer has released the Proton, or at least you can pre-order it. That's something. Proton. This is actually a Behringer synthesizer. Good lord, can you believe it? I mean, many years ago, they did the Neutron, which is a well-regarded little sort of Mother 32-esque type synthesizer in a similar sort of form. And generally speaking, everyone, oh, that's great. Look at that, it's a synthesizer. Whoa, they haven't had to rip anybody off or upset anybody. They just built, designed and released a synthesizer that does a good job, and it's at a great price. Fantastic. Now the Proton is the follow-up to that. It's dual oscillator, dual filter, dual VCA, dual envelope, looping, 4 envelopes in fact. I think it doubles up on pretty much everything to give you a larger, bigger, fatter, sort of unison, paraphonic, potentially analog sound with wavefolding, interesting bits and pieces, and a massive patch bay. I mean, I say it looks great. I don't like how it looks. I didn't like how the Neutron looked particularly, to be honest. Partly because of squeezing it into that Eurorack case as they do, like the Mother 32. It just gets busy and crowded. And if you look at that patch bay, if you're going to fill that up with stuff, it's going to be a bit busy in there. I mean, the Moog stuff is similar, and I would criticise the Labyrinth for the same reason. The Labyrinth has got a lot of small knobs, which are fiddly, and the patch bay can get fiddly. So I'm not convinced by this form factor for synthesizers. You know, I think it's great for Eurorack because you've got little bits and bobs that you can move around, and you need to save space. But on a desktop synthesizer, give it space, man. Just give it some space. Why not do that? Then have everything quite so shrunk down. But space and looks aside, it's great. Yeah, more of this, please. Just do more of it. More of that. Do interesting synths and make them bigger and interesting and do crazy stuff with it. I think that would be brilliant. So that's the Proton, probably available for a $5 sometime soon. I don't know how to pronounce it. So the Anyma V was this fascinating hardware physical modelling synthesizer from a few years ago, which kind of looked fascinating, sounded amazing, felt kind of otherworldly and slightly out of reach. Well, now they've released a virtual version, a software version, which is a lot cheaper, a lot more accessible, and of course you can have it on your desktop in no time at all. It's complicated and it sounds absolutely fantastic. I mean, there's something about physical modelling which just adds a completely different sense of character to a sound. I mean, samples are all very well, it sounds like the real thing because it's a recording of the real thing, but with physical modelling you have this extra layer of sort of change in modulation and character and intention and dynamics that you don't have in samples. And so it allows for a sound to develop within the physical models of the actual instrument itself. So rather than sampling what something sounds like when it's being generated or resonating within a piece of wood, you actually resonate the wood in a computer model, and then you can change that as it's working in order to find different variations and tonal changes within that. So physical modeling is very, very interesting. It's also very complicated. I mean, when you load it up, it's quite a disappointing front end, because it's like, oh, we're back in Windows 95 somewhere. It has a retro plugin look about it. But then when you start tapping on things, you just get pages and pages and pages of stuff that you can get into. I mean, if you're into the detail, into the minutiae, then this is definitely for you. Otherwise, it has sort of a macro front end. We can just change a few bits and pieces, which makes an interesting variation on the sound that you're playing with. Whole load of presets down the side, all of which sound great. I would have no idea how to start sound from scratch, so I'm very grateful for presets in that kind of situation. So this is really interesting. I don't know what happened to the hardware version, how successful that was in particular, but this looks like a great way to put their technology out there to a much, much wider audience, because it's a fantastic source of sounds. And there's a demo you can go and download and try it out yourself. Trey Modular sent me a couple of bits, which is very nice of them. Most of it sort of revolving around the Replicant VCF, which just is a great name for something which is essentially modelled on the filter on the CS80, which of course, as we know, is that classic synthesizer that did that thing with that soundtrack, with that film. So there's that. There's also the envelope for it as well, which is probably the most frustrating envelope on the planet, I think. I've never understood it, never got it to work. Your nice man at Trey Modular sent me a whole big explanation on how that envelope works, how you've got this initial attack and then some other attack level, or something initial level and then some other level. But I'm going to spend some time with it so that I can absorb that and learn it properly, and then perhaps explain it to you. Who knows? But they've got other things as well. They've got some shape thing. They've also got an oscillator from a Soviet synthesizer all coming out. So I just really wanted to go, hey, there's this modular company doing interesting things, and you should go and check them out, because there's some good stuff here. I'm still playing with the filter. I'd like to sit it next to the Descartes Voice and potentially even the Descartes Dream and see how that compares. It feels at the moment, my usage of it, it feels kind of mild and friendly as opposed to aggressive and gnarly, which tends to be the way filters go most of the time. So it's quite interesting to play with something that's a lot softer and is perhaps going to provide a more interesting change over time, rather than always on that fat baseline kind of filtering that I tend to do. And also I'll try to understand this bloody envelope. It's just that you fire it and it doesn't do. I mean, my understanding of envelopes is pretty basic, really, because they're forever tripping me up. But I can usually, in playing with a synthesizer, get an envelope to move a filter or to move a VCA. Usually I can do that. With this one, I can't seem to do it, at least not in a way that I can understand. So fascinating. And for people who like interesting envelopes, this is probably going to be ideal. But I do plan some point soon. I don't have any time, as you know. But if I ever find some, I'll try to do a video on it and try to grasp it and understand it, and we can grapple with it together. That'll be fun. Donna has released a drum machine. I think we saw this over a year ago at NAMM. The Donna D1 drum machine, D1 Essential or something. They're never quite sure what to call them. So, we can call it any of those things. But anyway, it's a Donna D1 drum machine. You've got 16 pads. Actually, 12 of them are actually playing the sounds. But it's an MPC style workflow where you've got drum kits, plenty. There's like 4 gigs worth of library inside. So tons of drum kits and hits and bits and pieces. 12 pads, 12 tracks that you can sequence, either step sequence or real-time sequence. A couple of performance effects, rolling, fills, that kind of thing. I mean, it looks great. I mean, it's kind of in a vein of something like the Circuit Rhythm or the Model Samples Digitac Electron kind of thing. It's that kind of cheaper end of the market. It's got tons and tons of kits built in, tons of patterns. You can just set it going, or you can write your own. I mean, you could, because you can also load your own samples in, you could make it into a single performance production studio. It could do the lot. You could turn things up, turn things down, trigger stuff, write patterns, create songs, yeah, all that sort of thing. I mean, obviously it's a great companion to their 303 clone that they also did. So yeah, good, cheap made stuff, probably based on something else. It seems to work all right, sounds okay, pretty good, looks like a lot of fun. The GODSPEar from G-Storm Electro. This is a filter based on the Oxford Oscar. The Oscar. Now, the Oscar is a pretty chunky synthesizer that we all like and rarely get a chance to play on. But the filter in it was particularly interesting because it was a dual filter, 2 filters in series. And the idea within GODSPEar is that you take those filters and you can push them apart to create this 2-peak affair, and then dial up the resonance, destroy the whole universe in self-oscillation and craziness, and it can just kind of like go to town. So this is that filter in a Eurorack module, lovingly recreated with all the wonderful CV control that we want over things. It sounds flipping gnarly, just excellent. Oh, I mean, that's a winner. That's definitely a winner of a filter, I think. I kind of try to work out how I can get to possess one, I think. Because it sounds like a lot of fun and something different. I mean, it's multi-mode as well. You've got low pass, high pass and band pass, but it's this pushing apart of the peaks, which is very, very interesting, and does add a lot of difference and flavour and variation to what has become a very familiar sound. Hainbach fired stuff at the moon. He did. He just sat there at Jodrell Bank or something, fired stuff at the moon and got the sound back. Very interesting. He then built a plugin designed to emulate that whole idea. So you send a signal to the moon, it bounces off rocks and stuff, and it comes back full of noise and modulation, because it's not bouncing off a flat surface, it's bouncing off a huge heavenly body that's moving in space at a terrific speed with an uneven surface. So you kind of expect it to come back a little bit crunchy, and so it does. And that's the basis of the plugin, really. It's fascinating. I mean, is it just a curiosity? Is it kind of like a fun, quirky thing, or is it actually useful? I mean, that's the question, I suppose. I mean, in some respects, in terms of curiosity, it does apparently contact NASA and asks them how far the moon away is, and it sets a delay time based on that. It also has this fantastic static, which is so familiar. You know, if you're a fan of sci-fi, or if you watch television or movies at all, you would have heard that static, and it's usually associated with not hearing somebody. You know, you go, hello, are you out there? And it goes, help, we're running out of air. Have you got rid of the monster? You know, that kind of thing. But that sound, to me, just evokes all these emotions of loss and loneliness and, you know, melancholy, depression, sense of things just being gone and unreachable. And that was really quite... I wasn't expecting that. Anyway, you can dial down the delay, so you're not got this 2-second delay between you do anything. You can like make it happen in real time within the plugin. You can dial down the static a little bit, and when you do that, you actually have a really nice lo-fi plugin, which does fascinatingly interesting things to your audio or whatever it is you're running through it. So yeah, I would say it is a totally workable plugin, and it's free. From the maker of the incomprehensible strokes comes the more comprehensible stacks. I don't mean incomprehensible, I just mean that it's this phenomenal thing that's all over your screen of all this stuff that's going on that's kind of can be difficult to penetrate. If you have the time to sit down in front of your computer and just get yourself lost in an immense exploratory and experimental groove box, then Strokes is absolutely for you. If you want to pull things together a little bit more, then check out Stacks, because it has a similar flavour to it from Congburn. It has similar notions and ideas of kind of craziness and complexity rolled into an interestingly intuitive interface. I think. So what is the idea? The idea is you've got this polyphonic synthesizer that's either regular analog waveforms, or it's wavetables, or is it all wavetables? I forget. And FM, stuff like that. Anyway, so synthesizer voice, right? You've then got a sequencer and effects, modulation, all that kind of stuff going on. So you create this sequenced loop. And then what you do, you capture that into a 4-track recorder, into one of the tracks, and then that loops back. So you're essentially recording it into a looper. So you do a load of stuff, find a sound and a rhythm and a vibe that you like, record that, and then change everything over here to create something to go along with that, and then record that alongside, and record it alongside. So you build up, loop and layer a whole bunch of stuff within this single interface. You can then bounce loops into a single loop to add more loops, so on and so forth, and just go to town building everything up. So you can create entire worlds, entire universes of soundscapes or rhythms or loops or whatever you like. Just keep going, and then you can apply granular stuff to it to just pull it all apart and just turn it into a smear of atmospheric nonsense. It looks fun. It looks a bit one colour. It could really do with a splash of different colorization, just so you know what the heck it is you are doing. But other than the sort of the rather monotone look, it looks and sounds pretty awesome. So I'd like to think I had the time to look into these sorts of things a bit deeper. But yeah, fascinating. Another modular company I'd just like to have a bit of a poke at is Krypt Modular, because they've got a couple of new things on Modular Grid as well. I'm not entirely convinced that they're entirely new, but I thought they were great in a spooky kind of way. So what we got? First of all, you got the Banshee, which is a screeching, gnarling, squaring, terrifying filter. It's a filter that falls apart at the touch of anything. It's got this illuminated ghost at the top that goes rah every time you pump that resonance anywhere past, a tiny fraction, and it has this deterioration to it. It has this sound that's cracking up and falling apart, which is great. That's what you want in an exciting filter. So I think that and the Oscar filter, the GODSPEar filter, those two would turn any rack into some kind of nightmare. In a really good way. So they got that, got the Bat channel, which is an 8-channel mono mixer, just simple, 8 channels, 8 inputs with mute switches, turn them up, turn them down, and a mix. There's no like aux send or anything, it's just very simple. Has this Bat motif that all lights up with it as well. So I thought that was really groovy and remarkably affordable as well for a mixer of that sort of size, that we could bring that number of bits together. And finally, here's a few things that we saw at Superbooth that are now becoming available. So let's mention them again. First up, we've got the Echo Cinematic from Knobula. This is an effects processor. It has delay, it has reverb, but then it's got this EQ filter, which could be low, high pass, notch and comb, that you can either scrape through the feedback loop from the delay. So the delay goes out, goes off, you then filter that loop as that then comes back, or you can do filtering on the whole thing, of course, because that might be a nice thing to do. But I think the key with the Echo Cinematic is the EQing or the filtering of that feedback loop, which gives this very sort of dove, very lo-fi vibe of running the output of a tape delay through a console, affecting it and having that come back in. I think that's the general idea. But this being Knobula, they couldn't just leave it alone at something that simple. Good grief, no. Because we've also got 2 assignable CV inputs to control things, and knob recording or automation. So you can control the knob about, and then you can record that up to 30 seconds worth of modulation, automation recording within it. The delay can also be synced to clocks. You can keep everything in time with what's going on. So it feels like you've got this very interesting sort of sculptable, lo-fi-ing, destructive delay and reverb within a single module. So you just stick everything through it as it comes back, EQ the heck out of it coming back in the other way. Sort of very playable. It sounds very playable to me. Then from Befaco, we've got the one-eye roll, as I like to call it, or as Befaco like to call it, a bit more like this.
In Greek, it's pronounced Oneiroi. 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 As here in Spain, we say Oneiroi. Oneiroi. It's how we pronounce it. But any Greek will appreciate the Oneiroi pronunciation.
Thank you. I'm unlikely to repeat that. So that's great. What is it? Well, it's kind of a weirdo drone monster. Because underneath Befaco, underneath all their regular nice smiley faces, is a kind of heart of darkness. Is a demonic evilness that perpetuates through the underbelly of the sort of stuff that they do. They really want to be bad, and this is that. So you've got a super saw, you've got a sine wave, which are droning and modulating each other. You've got a filter, a delay, a resonator, and a nice huge reverb in which to lose things. And as you pull these things in together, you can then record loops and loop back and push stuff around and modulate and do crazy weird stuff. I mean, it's really interesting because DivKid has done a great video on this. Go and check that out. And DivKid's very perky, you know. He's upbeat, he's perky, he's talking about things. And it's funny because underneath, as he's demoing stuff, you've got this demonic possession going on. You've got this screeching and screaming and howling and strange dronal soundscape of apocalyptic blah 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 blah, and he's going, oh, what do you do the boo, which is just quite funny. I love the juxtaposition of that. I think it's awesome. I have one in kit form which I plan to put together, although I understand it's a bit of an intense build. It's my favourite, so I do hope to get a go on it at some point soon, if only I can put the blooming thing together. So that's definitely something I'm going to try to do soon, I think. But otherwise, it sounds fascinating. Totally fascinating. You could throw that on, doing stuff underneath, bubbling away, moving about, looping and crazying, and then start building layers of things on top. Stick it then through the Echo Cinematic in order to then scrape away at those feedback loops as that comes through. Yeah. And then at the end of that, stick it into the OXI Instruments Meta. Sounds like a lot of fun. So this is probably a DJ inspired, live performance inspired module from OXI Instruments. They do the choral, they do the OXI Instruments sequencer thingy, the choral. I've done a lot of stuff on that. It's fantastic. Multifaceted, multi-timbral module within Eurorack. But this is the Meta. The Meta is a one knob solution that contains 6 different live performance effects. So you've got a reverb and a single knob. You go, lots of reverb, and then some other kind of reverb. You've got a gator sort of ratcheter thing that goes and stutters about things. You've got a DJ filter, a high pass and low pass. You've got a riser where you stick in some kind of starts going off, either noise or a sawtooth kind of styly thing. You've got a looper. Did I say that already? A delay. You just throw in delay on stuff. The idea basically is you've got this one knob, 6 different effect palettes, if you like, that you can transition through stuff with. You just put everything through it, turn it on, whack that up, and your dance floor goes crazy. Everyone's with you, everyone's there, and then you just turn this thing on, and you go, oh, and you're going, oh, you're back down again. It's great for a drop, great for a boost, great for a rise, great for a larking about in a DJ styly. It's like a fun house built into a single module that you can play all day. Don't have to do anything else. Just turn it on, whack it in, off you go. And lastly, as the jets start to appear on the horizon, we have, this is not rocket science, geometric anomaly. Now this is like a massive synth voice. It's an entire synthesizer. 2 oscillators, 2 filters, parallel series, I think, a whole bunch of modulators, envelopes, stuff going on, a whole load of cross modulation, sub oscillators, all feeding in different waveforms, all messing about, FMing each other, or just detuning each other. It takes what was called their rectangular thing, I think it was, which was a dual oscillator voice. Takes that and then it pulls all the analog technology, all the stuff that they learned in building the Phoenix, so the filtering and stuff like that from the Phoenix and the modulation and the VCAs, stuff that into it to create this entire synthesizer voice. It's amazing. I've only really seen one demo of it, and that was at Super Booth. So it'll be interesting to hear it a bit more in full flight. They've got a release party this Friday, so go along and check it out and hear what that's all about. It's bound to be phenomenal. Looks, of course, extraordinary. Sounds pretty epic. So that'll do. I think that's everything for now. At least, I mean, that's enough. That's enough. Now I'm going to go off and spend a couple of days in a treehouse, which I'm really looking forward to. So that would be great. Other than that, I've got tons of stuff to look at. Loads of stuff. Loads of things to play with, loads of things to make videos on. I've had some great ideas about making some more general videos on bits and pieces. I want to do some mastering to tape. I want to look at some tape looping. I want to look at some more outdoor stuff, some more live performance. Of course, we've got Synth East to think about. I've got a meeting about that tomorrow, which is, of course, happening next February. Don't forget about that. Next February, Synth East 2025. That's going to be very exciting. Got tons of modules to build or modules to review. Software synthesizers to get stuck into. Lots more testing to do on the surface and bits and pieces. Just no end. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic time to be alive, I think. And even though, I mean, there's this sense, I've been having this sense that the Eurorack bubble has burst and that it's all over for Eurorack. I don't think that's true. Now, what I would agree with is the idea that perhaps the extraordinary explosion of Eurorack is ebbing, because we don't need an explosion of new modules all the time. In fact, there's a point at which I think we might have done everything. I don't know if anybody can come up with another module that hasn't already been done. That perhaps is a thing. But I don't think Eurorack is going anywhere. I really think that it has established itself as a phenomenally creative and interesting place to make music. And for that, we are going to continue to need modules. Sometimes the same modules. Sometimes we don't need a new module. We just need current modules to keep on going and keep on becoming available. And perhaps in order to do that, new modules need to support the existence of continuing existing modules. And in some ways, as new module companies come and produce a bunch of modules, then perhaps fade away, we need a continuing role of the basics to still be there. We need basic oscillators and filters and bits and pieces. So it all still needs to be manufactured. And I would hate to see that only appear from big manufacturers like Behringer or stuff like that. We don't need that. We need the cottage industry. We need the little companies building stuff and getting excited about that, because that excitement is what drives creativity and what drives us to make music. It's excitement, inspiration. It's that buoys us along. It's not just a cynical grabbing of yet another shiny box or another thing that goes bing. It's that inspirational element that enlightens and allows us to express ourselves through this technology. Speaking of which, I have a new module. Should be out next month. Next week. Sometime over the next month. Should be out. I'll tell you all about it, of course, when it comes. Very exciting. Kinda. No, it is really exciting. It's simple. Simple is the best. Simple is always the best. It's simple, and I think you'll find it useful. At least I hope so. Yeah, I think you will, because I have genuinely found it useful. I have to keep taking it out of my case in case I give the game away. But whenever I stick it back in, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is a really good idea. Aha, really good idea. Let's go with that. So yeah, and Eurorack's not going anywhere. Let's keep feeding the monster. Keep feeding it. Gotta keep feeding it. But just to add that myself as Molten Music Technology, I am actively trying to spread myself a little bit more, because I have got very Eurorack focused, and that's been a delight. I've loved that. But I do also need to open up to a few other bits and pieces. A bit more software coming in, I think. A bit more thoughts about the wider industry and bits and pieces like that, so that I become more than a modular person. I think that's important. I'm going to pursue that. I think that's good. Will we have a live stream this Sunday? I'm not sure at the moment, because I haven't given it any thought whatsoever. I mean, we're already at the end of the month, so it will be early August. But I don't see why not at this point. So let's pencil it in, shall we? So Sunday night, 8 o'clock, let's assume I'm having a live stream. I'll let you know one way or the other when we get nearer the time. But that'll do. Nothing else important to tell you other than to have a beautiful summer. Enjoy yourself. Don't get burnt. Don't get stung. Don't fall over like an idiot. And so, yes, Hopefully my finger will be better soon. It is preventing me from playing guitar and from turning knobs with both hands at the moment. I broke it or dislocated it. The end sort of snapped off. I got it caught in one of the hexagonal bits of the surface of a dry ski slope. Snowboarding, you see. Snowboarding at my age, gotta be nuts. Snowboarding on dry ski slopes, even nuttier. It's an accident waiting to happen is what it is, and I've now had my accident. So yeah, I kind of cartwheeled, stuck my finger in a thing, snapped that off, I fell out in a heap, which is not pretty. This snowboarding lark, I'm sure it must be an absolute thrill on snow. On dry ski slopes, it's just mostly terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So hey, if you're a snowboarder out there who owns a snowboarding mountain and would like to, invite me and my boys along to do snowboarding properly, then get in touch. Do that. There you go. I hope that was helpful. In the meantime, go and make some tunes.